I'm working on an abscess on my upper right quad. It runs from the first molar all the way up to the incisor. So it's a very large abscess. It pretty much threatens to take down this whole quad. The second molar is also affected, but I cleaned that out some time ago and it hasn't recurred. The main part of the abscess is on the first molar, the bicuspid, the back of the eye tooth, and the incisor. The incisor has a nerve problem which comes from the eye tooth. The eye tooth is longer than the incisor, so the abscess has traveled up the back of the eye tooth, and there it affects the incisor and affects the nerve. I've been working on this for roughly a month. On the 5th of September, I cleaned out the gap between the eye tooth and the incisor. That did not relieve the abscess. On the 11th of September, I cleaned out the gap between the bicuspid and the eye tooth, and it was pretty bad. I realized that the abscess on the back of the eye tooth, that's what's causing the problem on the incisor. Then, 10 days later, on the 22nd, I cleaned out the abscess on the back of this molar, relieved this area. So this area from the eye tooth to the bicuspid has been cleaned out from two directions. The first one focused on the bicuspid. The second time focused on the molar. There's still some issues around this bicuspid, but largely this area has been debrided once. So along with the problem with the molar, there's another problem here. It looks like a time bomb with the area around the bicuspid. In particular, the bicuspid has two roots, which you can see, and the area between the two roots, this is a natural harbor for infection. The first debridement was what I call a primary debridement. It gives you an idea of how the abscess forms and how to attack it as well. The calculus forms in ridges. The bone, it retreats. The calculus forms a new ridge. So the tooth gets a series of ridges which function as a gasket. Where the tooth meets on the corner, the two ridges they meet, and it forms what I call pyramid. And this is between the teeth, and this creates the abscess down below. So the way to go after the abscess is to come in from the periphery to the center, to isolate the pyramid, to come through the different layers. Not quite exactly to the bone, but pretty close to the bone. Come in closer. This way, when you get to the pyramid's isolated. If you come in too shallow, what happens is you skip off the top of the pyramid. So that doesn't work. So the way to do it is to come in repeatedly from the outside, get your depth, so that when you finally get to the pyramid, it's isolated and it's easier to dislodge. Also, if you try to dislodge the pyramid directly, it's too difficult. It's just way too difficult. But if you can break off pieces of it from down below, then that makes it smaller and smaller. So finally, that can be dislodged. That releases the abscess. So that is the primary debridement. After a few weeks, and the area's had a chance to recover, then it's ready for the secondary debridement. What happens here is you get secondary abscesses as well. The calculus is formed across the level of the bone, and it's protected by thinner layers of calculus than you originally had, but they're still blocking the way. In addition, the roughness of this calculus makes it difficult to manipulate the curette. So the idea is to come in and create a glassy, smooth surface so that the calculus along the edge of the bone is a very thin ribbon, and then that can be removed, and that will relieve the secondary abscess. That's how it's done. For the initial abscess, this is a Langer 1-2. This has a fairly open angle, a slight angle. It's easier to pull straight. It's also easier to figure out where it is in the tooth. If you have a more angled curette, this is more offset. It gets very confusing. It's hard to figure out where you are. Also, going around corners is very difficult, and in particular, if you try to go around a corner, you're going to go right into the gum, so that's not so good either. So anyway, that was the Langer 1-2. Another good instrument which I like to use is the straight sickle. You pull it straight. If you can get the angle, this is a good instrument to use. Plus, it's strong. It's not going to break. The Langer can break. In addition, this is the Langer 5-6. This has a straight edge, so this is also fairly easy to understand. That's for the primary debridement. For the secondary debridement, I've decided that I like this. This is a micro or mini. This is a mini sickle. More or less, the way I figured out to do it is to remove the stuff in stripes. Separate the stripes. This way you get these isolated islands of calculus that are easier to break. So you can bring it in, make it come out, go in deeper, go in deeper, go in deeper, finally get to the bone. You get a clean area all across the bone, then can remove the calculus along the bone. That relieves the secondary abscess. So there's a primary abscess, which is the big problem. Then once the primary abscess is relieved, wait a few weeks, at least 10 days, give it a chance to recover. In my case here, I did a little bit of secondary a little over a week ago. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the same idea of approaching the bone, but I'm going to try to get the tooth as glassy as possible. That way I can also avoid traumatizing the area, so that when I finally go after the abscess, the area is not so traumatized yet. Also, what happens is the longer you're in there, the gums, they tend to open up for some strange reason. And then when the abscess releases, what you do is you basically go to town and you try to get rid of everything you can. So it's a good idea to try to get everything as clean as possible before the abscess breaks loose and before you start the trauma. That way, when things open up, with the limited amount of time that you have left, you can clean out the areas that are, otherwise difficult to get rid of. Ideally, you should also get it as clean as possible, bleed the abscess out, because what's going to happen then is the gums are going to close back up again. So when you go back later, it's going to be more difficult to get the area clean, when if you get it more in your original cleaning, then you're going to carry it further along. In this case, the abscess is acting up largely because there was a lot of junk that was left behind. I ran out of time, and that was it. Another thing that you can do is do the preliminaries, give it a chance to rest, then go back and do it. And that's what I did before. Like a week ago, I probably spent about at least a good 3 or 4 hours back there getting everything ready. So now I've got a fairly glassy surface to work with. As soon as I approach the bone, I'm already a good portion along the way. So I'm going to work on that. I'm going to relieve the secondary abscess.